I knew the second I saw the HOA newsletter with mandatory EV charging station audit stamped across the top in bold red that something stupid was about to go down. I just didn't expect it to involve paint, a padlock, and a woman named Darla. My name's Elias Norton. I'm a 39-year-old electrician, homeowner, and unfortunately a resident of Cypress Hill Estates, the most micromanaged neighborhood in the state. On paper, the HOA is supposed to maintain property value. In reality, it's a power trip for bored middle-aged tyrants like Darla Greenfield, our HOA president and self-proclaimed property safety czar. Now, I drive an electric truck and installed a level 2 charger on the side of my house. Completely legal, fully permitted, and well within the HOA's written rules. Yes, I read them. Twice. I even got the city inspector to sign off on it before I drilled a single hole. That didn't stop Darla from sending me 3 warnings in 2 weeks, claiming the aesthetic of the charger disrupts the visual harmony of the street. It's behind a bush. Last Friday, I came home from work and walked over to plug in my truck, only to stop dead. My charging port had a silver padlock snapped through the connector. The cord was looped and zip tied to the wall. She locked it. She actually locked my own charger. I stormed over to the HOA office, which is just a converted room in Darla's oversized Tudor-style home. She opened the door with that condescending face she always wears, as if she's waiting for you to thank her for ruining your day. "Can I help you, Mr. Norton?" she said, arms crossed, wearing a floral blouse that looked like it had been ironed by a laser. "You locked my charger." "I secured an unauthorized installation that poses a safety risk to the neighborhood," she replied smugly. "Until the HOA completes its audit, it will remain unusable." "You really should have waited for approval." "I have approval from the city. I submitted the documents to you weeks ago, and the HOA hasn't approved it. Our standards are higher." I swear she got some sick satisfaction from saying that. I filed a complaint that evening, but I knew how this worked. Darla controlled the board. Her cousin, her best friend, and her golf partner made up the rest of the members. Every vote was 4-1, so I got creative. I might not be able to unlock that padlock without risking a fine, but I could rewire the connector box from the inside. I installed a pressure switch just behind the plug and connected it to a small air canister filled with bright orange acrylic paint. Harmless, washable, but very dramatic. It took me 2 hours. I sealed it back up and waited. I figured it'd take her a day or two to get bold enough to mess with it again. It took her less than 24 hours. Saturday morning, while I was sipping coffee in my garage, I saw her strutting across my lawn like she owned it, jangling a new key in her hand. She bent down, undid the lock, and yanked the plug. FSSSHHHKK? The paint erupted straight into her face like a geyser. She shrieked and stumbled backward, hands flailing. Her blouse, now looking like a traffic cone, exploded on it. I opened the garage door slowly and leaned on the frame. "You know," I said, "I think the HOA might want to audit its own safety procedures." That looked dangerous. She just stood there, dripping orange, mouth open like she was buffering. "You sabotaged it," she gasped. "Nope," I said. "I rewired it for private use." "You trespassed and tampered with it." She stormed off, still dripping, and I swear I could hear her dialing someone before she even hit the street. I went back inside, grinning. The trap was just the beginning. I had cameras, witness statements, and something even better, evidence of her real crime. By Sunday morning, the video was everywhere. I hadn't planned on uploading it myself, just needed it for legal backup, but my neighbor, Jessie, got hold of the footage from her front yard camera and sent it to her brother, who happened to run a local satire blog. Within hours, the clip of Darla getting blasted with orange paint while tampering with private property was bouncing around the internet like a pinball. The comments were brutal. Someone even slowed it down and added opera music. I figured the humiliation might buy me some time. But Darla wasn't the type to lay low, not when her authority was on the line. Monday morning, I woke to a notice taped to my front door. The envelope was heavy, the kind of thick cardstock usually reserved for weddings or lawsuits. Inside was a letter with the HOA's official seal and a notice of emergency safety hearing. They scheduled it for Thursday, and I was required to attend to discuss unauthorized modifications to community infrastructure. I stared at the wording, community infrastructure. That charger was on my wall, on my land, behind my fence. She was trying to reclassify it like it belonged to everyone. I spent the next 2 days digging. I called the city's zoning office, pulled up property boundaries, and found a real gem buried in the HOA's own foundation documents, Section 4B, Paragraph 6. The HOA may not claim, regulate, or modify privately installed systems unless they extend into shared zones or violate municipal code. Mine didn't. But what really cracked the case open was the permit file. The city clerk, an older guy named Victor who still used a rotary phone and loved gossip, found something odd when I asked about inspection records. "Funny thing," he said, flipping through a folder thick with carbon copies. "Your permit was flagged for review last week. Says here the request came from the HOA office. That's not standard procedure. Flagged. Why? Says your installation didn't match what was submitted. Except I saw your setup myself. It's exactly what you showed us." He leaned in, lowered his voice. "Someone altered your blueprint." I froze. "You're saying they changed my file? That's illegal." Victor gave a slow nod, and dumb, because we keep originals in physical storage. "Someone only edited the digital copy." I asked for a certified copy of the original and a notarized statement from Victor confirming the tampering. He handed both over, along with a printout of the login credentials used to access my file. D. Greenfield, exec. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a folder thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. When Thursday rolled around, the emergency hearing took place in the HOA's rented meeting room at the local library. A sad little setup with 10 plastic chairs, a fold-out table, and a banner that reads "Cypress Hill Estates protecting our values." Darla didn't look like someone who'd just been humiliated online. She looked ready for war. Hair perfectly curled, lipstick sharp as a razor. She stood when I walked in, clearly trying to project authority. "Mr. Norton," she said, motioning to the seat across from her. "Let's begin." The other 3 board members sat beside her, flipping through their copies of the hearing packet. I noticed none of them made eye contact. "We're here today," Darla began, "to address your pattern of non-compliance and reckless conduct, which culminated in last week's hazardous incident involving your electric vehicle charger." "Hazardous?" I asked. "You mean the one you trespassed to tamper with?" She lifted her chin. "The board has determined that your charger constitutes a public nuisance. The fact that it discharged paint after being tampered with," I cut in. "By you. We'll get to that," she said with a tight smile. "But first, let's review this permit." She slid a copy of the altered blueprint across the table. "This clearly shows your installation extending into shared sidewalk space." I didn't touch the paper. Instead, I pulled out my own folder and laid down the certified original, stamped and signed. Then I added Victor's notarized statement and the system log showing her login credentials. "For the record," I said, meeting each board member's eyes, "this is the unedited version of the permit, showing the installation is entirely on my property." This document, I pointed to hers, was illegally altered. The city confirmed the tampering was done by someone using Darla's HOA credentials. The room went silent. One of the board members, a guy named Len who always looked like he'd rather be golfing, cleared his throat. "Is this true, Darla?" She didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. I kept going. "I've submitted this evidence to the city attorney. Altering municipal records is a felony. I've also filed a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Committee." Still, she said nothing. I stood up slowly. "This hearing is over. You don't have the authority to regulate my charger, and now you've committed an actual crime trying to make it seem like you do. I suggest you hire a lawyer." I left the room without waiting for a response. By Friday, things had escalated. A city investigator showed up at Darla's door with a warrant. I watched from my porch as they carried out a desktop computer, 2 external hard drives, and a filing box. Neighbors gathered in clumps, whispering. Jessie stood beside me, holding her coffee with both hands. "You think they'll charge her?" she asked. "They already did," I said, nodding toward the city car. "Forgery, tampering with public records, and misuse of HOA authority. It's going to stick." The fallout was swift. The board called an emergency vote that weekend without Darla. She was suspended pending investigation, and Len stepped in as interim president. First order of business: rescinding the charger audit nonsense. But the real kicker came 2 days later. A letter arrived from the city, not addressed to me, but to every homeowner in Cypress Hill Estates. It announced a formal audit of the HOA's operations, citing multiple complaints and confirmed misconduct. The city was appointing a temporary monitor to oversee board decisions, effective immediately. Darla's house went dark the next day, not a single light on by sundown. Word was she'd gone to stay with a cousin out of town. Nobody missed her. As for me, I added a new camera facing the charger and upgraded the paint trap just in case. Not because I expected more trouble, I just liked the idea of being ready. And maybe, just maybe, I liked seeing bullies paint themselves into corners. By the following Monday, the mood in Cypress Hill Estates was different. You could feel it in the way people lingered on sidewalks and actually made eye contact. For the first time in years, neighbors who used to rush indoors the moment someone from the HOA rounded the corner now stood in driveways, chatting in low voices, glancing toward the Greenfield house like it was some haunted relic. Darla was gone, sure, but her debris was still everywhere figuratively and literally. The HOA office window was still cracked from when a city investigator had accidentally knocked into it with a box of seized files. More than a few residents had started digging through their own HOA interactions, suspicious now that they knew someone had been forging documents. I was in my garage rewiring a panel for a neighbor when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone clearing their throat behind me. I turned to see Len, the interim HOA president, standing there with a clipboard and a look that said he hadn't slept in days. "I'm not here to argue," Len said before I could open my mouth. "Just need to ask you something." "Ask away," I said, setting down the wire cutters. He scratched the side of his neck. "Do you know anything about a missing escrow fund?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why would I?" "Because the city monitor just froze all HOA accounts. Turns out over $70,000 is unaccounted for. And every time we try to pull up the past 5 years of expense reports, we get a file not found. You ever see Darla with an external drive or anything?" "I saw her with an ego the size of a yacht, that's about it." Len didn't laugh. He looked genuinely stressed. "She listed the Greenfield house as collateral for the HOA's landscaping loan," he said quietly. "Except the loan doesn't exist. We called the bank. No such application was ever filed. That got my attention." "You're saying she faked a loan for work that never happened?" "More than that. We think she created a fake vendor. There's a company listed on the books, Verdant Municipal Solutions. They billed us 12 times last year. Except the address leads to a UPS drop box and the phone number is disconnected." "And let me guess," I said, walking over to my laptop. "The checks were signed by her alone." He nodded. I pulled up the county's business registry and typed the name in. Sure enough, Verdant Municipal Solutions showed up registered to a DG Enterprises LLC and filed under Darla's maiden name. Len leaned over my shoulder. "Can we use this? You bet. But don't take it to the board, take it to the DA." He hesitated. "You think it'll go criminal?" "It already has." That afternoon, I handed everything over to a county fraud investigator who'd shown up in a gray sedan with no hubcaps and a badge clipped to his belt. He barely blinked when I showed him the registry details, but his eyes lit up when I mentioned the HOA accounts being frozen. "Usually we get financial messes like this from small businesses trying to dodge taxes," he said, as he jotted something in his notebook. Not suburban HOAs. Ever deal with one run by a narcissist who thinks bylaws are a divine right? He didn't answer, but the corner of his mouth twitched. The next morning, subpoenas were issued. The HOA board was officially under investigation for financial misconduct, and the state's Department of Consumer Protection ordered a full audit of every HOA-controlled neighborhood Darla had ever been involved with. Apparently, she'd once been president of another community 2 towns over one that had quietly dissolved its HOA 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances. By Wednesday, the Greenfield house was swarming with unmarked vehicles. Neighbors stood on porches, openly watching as boxes were carried out and a safe was wheeled down the walkway. I spotted one of the agents holding what looked like a ledger the size of a dictionary. Jessie walked over from her yard, arms crossed. She was funneling HOA dues into her own company, she asked. I nodded. Set it up to look legitimate. Fake landscaping contracts, consulting fees, even a fake tree trimming invoice every spring. And the board never caught on. They signed off on reports they never read. Rubber stamps and blind trust. Jessie shook her head. You think she's going to prison, if there's any justice? Yeah. Embezzlement, document tampering, fraud across state lines. That's federal. That night I got a call from the city attorney's office. They were planning to file charges the following week and wanted to include my security footage as part of the pattern of abuse. Apparently, Darla had installed illegal surveillance on 3 other homes, disguised as HOA security cameras. Residents thought they were installed for neighborhood safety. Turns out, they were only pointed at the yards of people who'd challenged her. By Friday, the neighborhood tapped into something it hadn't had in years: energy. Real, productive energy. People were organizing, repainting fences, fixing sidewalks. Someone even started a petition to remove all HOA architectural restrictions entirely. At the next board meeting, held in the community park under a rented canopy, the turnout was triple what it usually was. Len stood at the front, looking slightly more confident than he had in my garage. We've got a few things to vote on, he said, holding up a sheaf of papers. First, we're opening the books. All financial records will be posted online for any resident to review. Applause. Second, we're proposing a bylaw amendment. No board member may serve more than 2 consecutive terms, and no family members can serve simultaneously. More applause. And third, he continued, we're dissolving the Discretionary Enforcement Committee. From now on, no fines can be issued without a majority vote from the entire board, and every complaint has to be backed by photographic or video evidence. The crowd erupted. People were clapping, cheering, even laughing. A guy near the back yelled, "Let's get rid of the lawn police while we're at it." And the laughter doubled. Later, as I was packing up some tools, a woman I didn't recognize approached. She introduced herself as Claire, a former city planner who just moved in a few months ago. Your little paint trick, she said, smiling slightly, was genius. Thanks. I prefer to call it unauthorized aesthetic enhancement, she laughed. You ever consider running for the board? I blinked. Not really my thing. You've already done more to fix this place than the last 3 boards combined. Think about it. I promised I would. I didn't mean it at the time, but later that week, I caught a teenager trying to kick over my charger. Before I could say a word, Jesse's husband came running out of his garage, phone in hand, yelling that he'd already called it in. Other neighbors came out too, not to watch, but to help. The kid ran off and someone shouted after him, "We take care of our own now." That's when I realized something had changed. Darla's reign had ended in orange paint and federal charges, but what followed wasn't just cleanup, it was transformation. The HOA no longer felt like a parasite. It was a skeleton crew of neighbors trying to rebuild trust. And for the first time, people weren't afraid to speak up. They were just waiting for someone to show them how. The first official audit results came in 3 weeks later, delivered in a thick white envelope to every mailbox in Cypress Hill Estates. The city's appointed monitor, a woman named Elena Vargas with a background in municipal fraud investigation, had worked fast. Her team had combed through 5 years of financial records, subpoenaed bank statements, and interviewed more than 24 residents off the record, but word still got around. I sat on the porch with the unopened envelope in one hand and a wrench in the other, watching a crew install new streetlights that didn't flicker every third night. When I finally peeled it open, I wasn't surprised by the contents, but I was impressed with the detail. The report named Darla Greenfield as the architect of a deliberate and sustained embezzlement campaign, listing over $74,000 in misused funds. Every expense was accounted for: the fake vendor payments, the non-existent consultant contracts, even an invoice for a security gate upgrade that was never done. One entry stood out: a $5,000 charge for community morale enhancement through seasonal installations. That turned out to be the lawn flamingos she insisted everyone remove 3 days later. But the real bombshell came in the form of a footnote. The audit had uncovered a second bank account opened under the HOA's name, but with only one authorized user. Darla had used it to funnel money into a short-term rental property across town, a duplex she listed under a shell company. She'd been collecting rent on the side while claiming the property was a storage facility for HOA equipment. The kicker: the city tax records still listed it as residential. That same afternoon, Darla was arrested at a gas station 2 counties over. She'd been staying at a friend's cabin and had tried to withdraw cash from a frozen account. The clerk recognized her from the paint video that had gone viral again after the audit results leaked. The police report said she was cooperative but visibly shaken. She didn't ask for a lawyer at first. That changed once she was told what charges were being filed: wire fraud, grand larceny, falsifying public documents, and misuse of community funds. 4 felonies, and at least 2 carried mandatory prison time. The next HOA meeting was held in the elementary school cafeteria. They expected maybe 30 people. Over 100 showed up. Some brought folding chairs. Others stood along the walls, arms folded, waiting. Len took the mic and read from a prepared statement, but it was Elena Vargas who held the room. She stepped up in quiet heels, her pressed blazer making her look more like a federal prosecutor than a city appointee. When she spoke, it was direct. "You weren't just overcharged," she said. "You were deceived. This HOA was used as a personal ATM by someone who saw your trust as a weakness. That ends now." She outlined the plan: a temporary freeze on all discretionary spending, mandatory third-party oversight for future budgets, and a full revote of the board within 60 days. Anyone connected to Darla's fraudulent activities, even unknowingly, was barred from running. Then she flipped the page. And finally, the HOA will dissolve all standing fines issued by the previous board unless verified by independent evidence. If you paid a fine under false pretenses, you're entitled to reimbursement. People didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just sat there stunned. Some of them had been paying bogus fines for years. One man near the front, an older guy with a limp and a faded army cap, shook his head slowly, whispering something to his wife. She covered her mouth with both hands. Later, as people filtered out, Claire, the former city planner, caught up to me near the gym doors. "You should still run," she said, not even bothering with a hello. I laughed. "I'm not the neighborhood politician type." "You're not. That's why people would vote for you." Something in her tone made me pause. She wasn't trying to flatter me. She was tired. All of us were, from years of being told to repaint shutters and trim bushes while our dues vanished into someone's second mortgage. "I'll think about it," I said. "No, don't think. Just do it. We need people who know how to fix things, not just file complaints." She walked off before I could respond. That night, I opened up my garage and started sketching out a new breaker box layout for my neighbor, whose wiring was older than either of us realized. As I worked, People dropped by, some with drinks, others with questions. One guy just wanted to borrow a ladder. It wasn't about the charger anymore. That had started it, sure, but now it was about something bigger. Darla's arrest had cracked the shell. Underneath all the rules and fines and manufactured tension, there had always been a real neighborhood, one that actually wanted to work together, not just survive between citations. 2 days later, I filed the paperwork to run for the new board president slot. I didn't make a speech or hang signs. I just fixed the streetlight at the corner of Willow and Eastbrook after the city claimed it wasn't their responsibility. Word got around. Election day came and went with no drama. Only 2 people ran for president, me and a guy named Rick who spent most of his campaign talking about fence height regulations. I won by a landslide. At the first official meeting of the new board, we sat under the same canopy in the park. The air smelled like fresh mulch and someone's overcooked barbecue. There were no fancy banners, no clipboards with pre-rehearsed statements. Just 5 of us, sitting in folding chairs in a circle, listening to what people actually wanted. We passed 3 motions that first day. 1, to remove all architectural restrictions that weren't tied directly to safety or zoning. 2, to establish a community maintenance fund that residents could vote on how to use. And 3, to permanently ban the use of padlocks on anyone else's property without written consent and a second-party witness. That last one got a few laughs. As we wrapped up, a boy no older than 15 walked past with his bike, glanced at my now infamous charger, then called back over his shoulder. "Hey, you gonna paint anyone else this year?" I grinned. "Only if they ask for it." That night, I replaced the paint canister with a small brass plaque that read, "Unauthorized authority will be colorfully addressed." Claire stopped by later and found me on the porch again. "You think it's over?" she asked, handing me a cold bottle of ginger soda. Darla's facing real time. The HOA's got oversight. People are finally speaking up. "Yeah, I think it's over." She took a sip from her own bottle, then pointed at the charger. "Still can't believe that's what started all this." I looked out over the street, freshly paved, no longer patched with gravel. Kids were riding scooters again. Someone had set up a projector in their driveway for a movie night. Sometimes it takes a little pressure to blast the truth out. She groaned at the pun, but didn't argue, and for the first time since moving into Cypress Hill Estates, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. The power games were over. The HOA wasn't a weapon anymore, it was a tool, finally in the right hands. Mine were just calloused enough to hold it.